My goodness, I look brutally handsome in that picture. I don't know what's happened over the years, but obviously the ravages of age have hurt it badly, so I apologise for the incongruence. I did once look like that. Yeah, well, I'm just going to have a general chat. I'm going to talk a bit about a case, as you know I did for Kim. I'll just do a bit of a general introduction because I just sort of give you a few background stories, just for entertainment purposes, of course. And then I just want to mention a bit about the case. On the, I started doing these cases, and it wasn't because of any legal skill. It was really because I think I was the only guy at the time prepared to do it. There was a great fear on the land. There still is a fear on the land. And the first sort of, I've been doing quite a few cases over the years, but when I first specialised in religious liberty, am I gone? I'm back. I feel like it's been a rock star. That was a mistaken career. Hey, baby. You can get used to it up here. But I remember the first case that sort of began a road for me. And some of you will or won't remember this. There was a man called Harry Hammond, and I think it was about 201, 203. And he stood outside a gay bar. You best remember it was very different then, and the Human Rights Act had a very corrosive effect on our liberties. But going back to that date, this 70-year-old individual, which at the time I thought was very old, I'm now thinking it's remarkably young, but at the time, he stood outside a gay pub. He unfurled a banner saying, "Stop homosexuality, stop lesbianism, turn to Jesus." And a crowd of young people, both homosexuals and non-homosexuals, assaulted him, threw him to the ground, poured water over him, took his banner off him. And then the police turned up and arrested Harry Hammond and for inciting his own attack. Now, I'm just trying to ask you to travel back in time to that era. I was utterly appalled and disgusted that a 70-year-old man had been attacked. The police came round and arrested, not defended the 70-year-old man, arrested him. And then that phrase, it became very common after that. You incited your own attack. If you exercised your rights of free speech, of dissent, you were a target. So that was sort of the beginning of my road into sort of initially religious liberty cases. And I was so disgusted. I remember I phoned up the lawyer. It was down in Bournemouth, and he just said to me, "Take the case off me, it's a hot potato." And then when I did that case, I was warned by my chambers, barristers' chambers, if you do that case, there could be consequences, which is a very foolish thing to say to me, because I'm one of the guys that would go, "Yeah, okay, bring it on." So that set me off on a road. That was rapidly followed a few years later. I got involved. I started off and did it all and was involved with the Employment Tribunal. I don't know if some of you can remember this, the older ones. I did the BA Cross case, where British Airways wouldn't allow somebody to wear a cross. And that was a great case, as you can imagine. Just by way of background, I won't go into all the details, because actually there was some legal reasons I did it up to the Employment Tribunal and then switched to another client, but I won't go into that. But anyway, on that road of that case, 13 British judges up to our Supreme Court held that the cross was a piece of jewelry, it wasn't a religious symbol, and so 13 British judges from the best of our land, they all go to Oxford, as you know. That's the sort of requirement. I'm slightly being a bit flippant, but they're not uneducated individuals. And and anyway, then we appeared in the European Court, and we had a Polish judge who basically said, "I've never heard such nonsense in all my life." Now, this Polish judge was, of course, from a communist country, and he was also, I think his brother used to be on the Central Committee of the Polish Communist Party, and they're very friendly in Europe, much more friendly than our judges. You have a cup of tea with them and you have a little chat with them. Over here, the judges just throw books at you and sort of stuff. And anyway, I remember thinking at the time, if you need a judge from a former communist country to tell you the cross is a Christian symbol under Article 9 of the European Convention, you've got a pretty desperate affairs in this country. And then I did a final story I'm giving you. I did a case of a man called Stephen Copsey who didn't want to work on a Sunday. You may think that's quite normal. He's a Christian. He didn't want to work on a Sunday. And so we took it to court. And he's one of these very quiet type Christians, Stephen Copsey, very determined, solid in his views, but rather shy. You wouldn't realize he would have that strength of character, if that made sense. One of those individuals. Anyway, so he's giving evidence in court, and he's very sort of meek and mild. And you've got to give me a bit of poetic license. I have to entertain you a bit. Anyway, we're in court, and all of a sudden the judge went insanely crazy, and he started screaming at this Stephen Copsey. "Tell me where it says in your Bible you can sit at home and watch football while your colleagues have to go into work on a Sunday. You tell me where you can be lazy and let other people work." That's what the judge. And it's one of those things in court. It's normally quite a sort of quiet little event, and you sort of occasionally when temperatures are lost. Most barristers, when that happens, they throw themselves under the desk and throw their wig over the top. It means it's all over. You didn't wear a wig in this case, so I couldn't quite do that. And when someone shouts like that, I mean, the whole court went silent. What was probably no more than 30 seconds when you could hear a pin drop. It felt like an excruciating 8 minutes of torment, Anyway, then Stephen, by the way, at that stage, I had a sort of press following, so the press galleries were all full and all that. And anyway, Stephen Copsey just looks at the judge and goes, the 10 Commandments, number 4. Now, I'm actually glad that you can do that, because the 10th Commandment, as we all know, and actually a very important moral code, probably the greatest moral code from the Jews, the most civilizing force one of the most civilizing forces in our civilization. But actually, the 4th commandment is keep the Sabbath day holy. Now, you had a bit of a giggle here. A lot of people wouldn't know that. Someone said 10 Commandments, number 4. They would be a lot more blanker now. This was a few years ago, this. Anyway, in the court then, everybody just collapsed laughing. I mean, everybody knew the 4th commandment then. Everybody knew it said, keep the Sabbath holy. That's where it says. It's that where the judge, when he was saying, tell me where in the Bible you can sit at home, he went, number 4. And the whole journalistic sort of back row collapsed laughing, and it was sort of, everyone couldn't control it. And that kept the judge totally silent for the rest of the case. Not a beep out of him, because not only was he rude, he was ignorantly rude. I rather enjoyed that. And then, of course, I had the adventure of meeting. I brought one of my arguments in court for me, but we met a number of people, obviously the great Kim Isherwood, and she needs no introduction, but there were a number of other people. There was Adele, who I've just had the beauty. I'm going to give you too many stories. I met Adele, Grace Patton, I'm not sure I ever fully met her, just court and stuff, Mark Thomas and Kate Bloom, and they are all here. Woo! Actually, I've got another crazy story to tell you. this is my storytelling time. Kim said, if I don't entertain you, she's not going to give me the 50p for the chips tonight. I have been to Cwmbran. I was here last time. This is the only second time I've been here, I have to confess. It's not kind of the place you normally go, even when you go to Wales. You have to understand that. I was here in 1988, and I had hair in those days. Can you believe it? I was here in 1988 when Cwmbran Magistrates Court, this is another story of mine, made a reference from the local B&Q that if they couldn't open their shops on a Sunday, there had to be a reference to Europe. And they made a reference to Europe, and I got involved in that case because I was involved with instructed by the Keep Sunday Special campaign in those days. But I'm just remembering, I was back here all those years ago, and it was actually, it wasn't an unlawful reference, but they weren't meant to do it. It was all very strange. But actually, Cwmbran Magistrates Court kicked off 4 years of litigation, kept me quite busy, so I'm quite grateful, kicked off 4 years of litigation. Do you remember when the shops could open or not open? And it was all from this place here. And I was in the magistrates court. I was really just observing, because I was quite young in those days, and I was just sent on behalf of Keep Sunday Special to observe. And I remember coming down here, and it's sort of, from that little courtroom in those days, which was not particularly impressive, it kicked off the whole Sunday trading fight. And yes, but anyway, back to story. We got involved with challenging the Welsh Government on the religion and relationship and sexuality education that the Welsh Government were introducing. I'm just going to make some sort of general comments. First, I don't want to sound sycophantic, but let me be sycophantic. I've got to give praise to Kim and the team. They were actually fearless. It's a great pleasure having a client who's fearless. You know the reality. I'm scared to go to court. Oh, what are the risks for me? Is someone going to pay all my fees? Can you find a rich benefactor? I'm not going to do it unless I go to one of these organizations. I do this. No, none of that was Kim. Bring it on. They can do their worst. And you don't know what a pleasure that is for one of us barristers. We're not looking over our shoulders. I was thinking, poor woman, she'd go totally bankrupt. She's got no idea what she's doing. She'll be on the street corner rattling a tin. But, if she's up for it, she's up for it. So, and look, she's been prospered, and she's made a name for herself. And often what people fail to realize, people are so scared nowadays, what they fail to realize is if you make a stand, we've got a bullying government, and bullies are always scared of people who make a stand. And when I did that BA Cross case, well, I won't go into the details, but you can imagine this lady who won't wear a cross. Well, I've heard over the years they've culled British Airways from its height of 100,000 in the early 2000s to 50,000 employees. But there'll be one employee they won't dare touch. There'll be one employee they're not stupid enough to touch. So what people don't realize is if you make a stand, the bullies actually often get scared. But they are bullies, and bullies, they want, it's cancel culture. I know people in it's not a joke. Overnight, and everyone's so scared. All your so-called friends don't want to speak to you. All the people you've worked with who you've thought would support you, they're not there. So we did the case, and we challenged relationship and sexuality education. And I think the lead up to it, and I'm sort of just trying to review it, because I don't want to, obviously I'm not going to babble about law. I'll read a few bits out. But society's changing from a sort of true liberal society where people can disagree, have different views and are respected. Liberalism began to change. I began to notice it. It wasn't enough that you could choose your own way. And that's actually fundamentally a Judeo-Christian position, that people have the integrity and the responsibility to find their own way and choose their own version of the good. But liberalism changed, and it's moved that every organization or group had to conform to the government's view of good. Or you wouldn't get a grant, or you won't be registered, or this will happen to you. And then now all individuals, we must all conform to the government's version of the good. And unfortunately, Kim had enough of that. So liberalism has very much been changing, and I'm just reading. These are sort of my notes. I hope that I've chosen good bits. I don't want to be too legal, but some of the things I said in court. Neutrality and impartiality are impossible to achieve, I said, with my sternest look. So it's in my appeal notice. I said it in my appeal note, in sexual ethics, because of the breakdown in consensus. It was not possible during previous periods of greater consensus. The assertion that the teaching will be neutral and impartial is implausible. A right of excusal, the removal of children, is more necessary as society fragments. And that's, that is something that is happening. It's very difficult in some of these cases running arguments, because there was a period where there was a general consensus. Everybody knew there was conscientious exemptions to war. But now it's so fragmented. It's whether you want to eat vegan food or go to a grammar school. The consensus of right and wrong is going, and it makes these arguments difficult. And then I went on to say, the parental power to determine the content of their children's education is particularly important in cases of philosophical, political, religious, or moral controversy. The meaning of life, right and wrong, good and bad, beneficial or harmful. So, these are very controversial areas. What do we think? What do we think is right and wrong, good and bad? What is beneficial or harmful? And this right must be ceded to the private citizen by the democratic state if it is to remain liberal. So I was labouring that thing I was telling you of the transfer of a country from a truly liberal state where people can choose these questions for themselves to a state where we must all conform to the common good or be cancelled. And that is where we are. So we argued that, and we went into court. And actually, what's at stake, and that's why PCP and other groups are very important. What's at stake is not just RSE. It's, they can teach whatever they want. They're going to teach whatever they want. They're going to go further and further and further on controversial subjects, into your homes and homeschooling, into what you teach your children, on morality and wrong. They're going to go in there because there's no concept of how a democratic liberal state functions. It's simply Parliament can do whatever it wants on 15 minutes with a 28-year-old MP who's never had a job. That's the brutal reality of it. And, and it's all very, very politicized. One of the cases we quoted in Kim's case, when we argued about, there's a case called Campbell and Cozzens from 1982 on corporal punishment. It's 1982, it's a long time ago, and a mother said, oh, my boy may be corporally punished at this school. And he'd never been corporally punished, never been at risk of corporal punishment, but he might in this fantasy scenario. And of course, the European Court struck that down. you were violating their right to education, because they wanted to stop corporal punishment. That's the name of the game. And so in 1986, the decision was in 82, but to conform with our international obligations, in 1986, corporal punishment in state schools was abolished in the United Kingdom. Now, I just give you that example. Imagine if somebody said, conversely, I'm not going to send my child to school. They might just potentially hear something in the RSE lesson which I don't like. Well, it'll be pretty grim nowadays. It's a fight nowadays. And, you know, I give this talk now in the knowledge that the relationship of sexuality education was fully over the whole school environment. They had officers. It was to be integrated into every class, from mathematics to, it was a full-scale introduction of this type of hard sexuality education. And I give that now, and that's where Britain was heading to. And there was a report by the Joint Committee on Human Rights in Parliament in 2007, which said children need to be protected from religious teachings that doesn't approve of same-sex relationships. So you can see where Britain has been going over all these years. And it's been sad and it's been depressing, mainly because there's no uplifting of the human spirit, if you get my meaning. There's no uplifting of human dignity. There's no responsibility and ownership of your moral decisions. You're cattled into a position where you have to agree with what the government agrees, or the government gets very, very angry with you. And but I say that because there is a new president in the United States. They can't teach us in American schools on the first day of his presidency. He's abolished every government department. He's abolished the diversity, equality, and inclusion department. And you know what? Nobody cares. I mean, all this stuff, a lot of people just don't care, because when the pressure's off, like when the Soviet Union stands down, people go, whippee, you've gone. I'm just going to close. Now, I hope I can. This was another argument I raised. I've got to sort of tell you some of the stuff that happened in the case. Otherwise, as I said, I might get some fish and chips tonight if I play it right. But this was one of my closing submissions. By the way, I just sort of looked at it as I was prepping for this. Some of the arguments, I thought, my goodness, they were good. If I say so myself. Anyway, I said, first, parents have the right to be informed of the content of education provided and access to materials to be used. If parents cannot establish with certainty, and not simply by word of mouth or second-hand report, what their children are being taught, any exercise of rights would be nugatory. Secondly, they have a right to object without prejudice to them or their child. It is important to emphasize that parental disagreement with the content of teaching materials is not itself a ground for suspecting they are failing in their duty as parents. It may instead be an indicator that the school is acting unlawfully. Thirdly, they have a right to have their objections addressed reasonably, either by withdrawal of material offensive to them or explanation of how it is balanced with equal regard for their own opinions and not presented as the single truth. Fourthly, they have the ultimate right to withdraw if their objections are not reasonably addressed. This is the only way of ensuring that the priority in determining the content of education rests with the parents and not the state. Any enforcement action against them for breach of their Section 7 duty must take account of their fundamental rights. I hope that was just a submission. So in conclusion, we know we've got to fight. We know, I mean, I used to, I don't know, you're going to beat me up afterwards, but I'm an honorary Welsh citizen through Kim. But I am a tourist here. But you've had a Welsh government in Wales for an awful long time. And actually, I don't think these one-party states are working well. And it's the same in Scotland. They're dominated by the SNP, and there's no the calibre is poor often of the candidates. The debate is poor of the candidates, and they live without fear of accountability to the electorate. And there's a great sense of powerlessness. I think all I can say is we're going to have a fight on our hands. We're going to have to fight for what we believe in. But there's got to be an element of risk. I'm not just saying this, you've got to be a bit of Kim. I mean, I would love us to find a billionaire. I mean, we may find a billionaire. And I'd love to say, if all your costs are paid and everything's done for you, you'll be amazed how many people run forward, because that's what they really believe, but they're scared of the consequences. But in this world, whether it's the Soviet dissidents or the people who stand up and risk prosecution, you have to go forward with support and a group, but it's not an easy road. It's not an easy road. And many of those cases I gave you, Harry Hammond, the first one I said, well, he was assaulted. Great. And he actually died very shortly afterwards, and the police refused to accept that assault was linked to his death. The BA Cross lady, well, she took on British Airways. You tried taking on British Airways. And the other case, Stephen Copsey, that's the Sunday working guy, when I was representing him, he'd been sacked, He'd lost his job because he didn't want to work Sundays. So I'm not going to, obviously it's good if there's a good way of doing it, but you've got to be brave, and I know you're members of the bravest place in Wales, so let's bring them down.
So that's Paul, our barrister.
Is he going to have time for questions?
He proved that the government's barristers and the government were lying about the UNESCO and the rollout, folks.
Say his name, Paul.
Let's get round into a position because won't get this on the BBC, right?
Well, thank you, and do send me the video clips because my wife won't believe this happened. And secondly, the concert's going to be next week. Me and Kim are going to form a rock band. Just to say, you've got to get out there and support Kim because this is just the beginning. If we win, they will appeal. And when we win, they will appeal, and they'll fight it with your money all the way. So we've got to use all we can, and we have to fight for the rights of, in this case, we're fighting for the rights of children. I can't actually say too much because as your humble barrister, it's not a contradiction, humble barrister, trust me, but as your humble barrister, I've just got to slightly be restrained in public conversation. So thank you for all your work, thank you for all your support. This is the first time I've had anything like this, believe it or not.